Have you ever felt like waking up spiritually left you more lost than before, as if some invisible map was ripped from your hands the moment you started seeing clearly? You open your eyes one morning and the routines that used to matter, the promotions, the comparisons, the approval you chased suddenly feel hollow, like you're moving through a script someone else wrote for you. But here's what no one warns you about: the emptiness that rushes in where your old certainties used to live isn't a mistake. It's the initiation. And Carl Jung had a dark warning for those who reach this threshold without understanding what's really happening. If you're feeling directionless after awakening, if you sense you've been chosen for something but can't name it, this might be the most important message you'll hear. And before we go further, I want to invite you into something deeper. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing to this channel and turning on notifications, because we're building a community here, a space for those walking the path of real self-knowledge, not surface spirituality. Every week, we release content that guides you through the stages of individuation, helping you integrate what you're discovering about yourself. You'll find playlists in the pinned comment and description that take you step by step through Jung's teachings, shadow work, and the alchemical process of becoming whole. This isn't just information, it's a practice, and you don't have to walk it alone. Now, back to what Jung understood that most spiritual teachers miss. When you awaken, you don't gain wings. You lose the fuel that used to move you forward. The bills are still there. The relationships haven't changed. The job still demands your time, but the invisible engine that once powered you through all of it, performance, validation, the hunger for external proof that you matter, stops burning. And in that silence, you're left standing between two worlds, one that no longer makes sense and another you can't yet name. Jung called this liminality, and he knew it could destroy you if you misunderstood its purpose. You didn't break. Your psyche updated. And now it's asking you to live from a completely different operating system, one the world around you doesn't recognize or reward. This is where most people make the first fatal mistake. They interpret the emptiness as failure. They think something went wrong, that they should feel blissful, enlightened, untouchable. But Jung was ruthlessly honest about this. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because waking up means withdrawing your projections. You've been living in a house of mirrors, attributing power to bosses, partners, gurus, systems, and now those mirrors are cracking. What you're left with is raw, unfiltered contact with your own unconscious, the dreams that disturb you, the emotions that surface without permission, the truths you can no longer ignore. And here's the secret most people don't survive long enough to discover: this disorientation isn't evidence that you failed. It's evidence that you stepped out of the current that keeps everyone else moving in circles. You've been called into slowness in a world addicted to speed, into invisibility in a culture obsessed with being seen, into ambiguity in an age that demands certainty. And that calling doesn't come from your ego. It comes from something deeper, something Jung named the self, the center of your psyche that's not interested in comfort, only in wholeness. So what does it mean to be chosen? Let's be clear. It's not about being special in the way the ego wants. It's not a cosmic promotion that makes you better than others, but there is a real phenomenon Jung documented, and it's not vanity, it's vocabulary. When powerful material rises from the unconscious, it often arrives wearing the robes of myth. You might feel like a healer, a prophet, a warrior, a guide. You might sense that you've been entrusted with something sacred, that you're carrying a burden or a gift that others don't see, and Jung would validate that. These are archetypal energies moving through you, and they speak the language of symbol, not literalism. But here's where his warning becomes urgent. If you identify too closely with that energy, if you start believing you are the archetype rather than a vessel for it, you fall into what Jung called the mana personality, an inflated, secretly fragile self-image that wants to be untouchable, above the mess of ordinary human life. And when that inflation collapses, and it always does, the fall is harder than anything you experienced before waking up. Because now you're not just lost, you're ashamed of having believed you were found. The remedy? Grounding. The energy moving through you doesn't want a pedestal, it wants incarnation. And incarnation begins in the least romantic place imaginable, the ordinary. Make your bed as if it were a ritual. Cook a simple meal and be present with every movement. Pay a bill without resentment. Walk barefoot on earth. Touch something real. The stronger your roots in the mundane, the more safely your psyche can download new truths without shattering the container. Because here's what happens when you're ungrounded. You oscillate wildly between messianic grandiosity and crushing despair. One day you feel invincible, convinced you have the answers everyone needs. The next, you can't get out of bed, certain you've been deluding yourself all along. This isn't bipolar disorder, though it can look like it. It's what happens when archetypal energy floods an ego that hasn't built the musculature to hold it. And the musculature you need isn't built in meditation retreats or plant medicine ceremonies, though those have their place. It's built in the repetitive, humble acts of showing up to your life exactly as it is. Then, inevitably, the shadow comes knocking. Envy, rage, shame, grandiosity, avoidance, pettiness, lust, greed. These aren't signs that you've regressed or that your awakening was fake. They're signs that the material you've been repressing your entire life finally has permission to surface. For years, maybe decades, your ego maintained stability by performing goodness, light, love, and more light. You constructed an identity around being nice, being helpful, being evolved. But the self, the deep, self-organizing center of your psyche, doesn't gain its power from being one-sided. It gains power from integration, from including what was exiled. And so the shadow emerges, not to punish you, but because it's finally safe enough to be seen. This is the part of the journey where people either do the work or spend the rest of their lives running. If you run, the shadow chases you. It shows up in your projections. You'll see the traits you hate in everyone around you. It shows up in your body. Chronic pain, fatigue, mysterious illnesses that no doctor can explain. It shows up in your relationships, patterns that repeat no matter how many times you start over. But if you turn and face it, if you can say calmly and without drama, this envy is mine, this rage is mine, this shame is mine, something profound settles, the heat drops. You become harder to manipulate, harder to recruit into collective panic, harder to impress with hollow promises. Shadow work isn't a side quest in the journey of individuation. It is the curriculum. And it's not done once and checked off. It's a spiral you return to at deeper levels, each time with more capacity, more honesty, more willingness to see what you'd rather not. But here's what almost no one talks about. You can't do this alone. You need a container, a therapist trained in depth psychology, a mentor who's walked through the fire and didn't come out preaching only love and light. A small group of people who listen more than they fix, who can witness your mess without needing you to be inspiring. Without a container, the energy of awakening fragments. You swing between inflation and collapse, between thinking you're the Messiah and thinking you're irredeemably broken. With a container you metabolize. The waves still come, but you learn to surf them without drowning. And the container doesn't have to be formal or expensive. It can be a journal practice where you write without editing, letting the unconscious speak. It can be a creative practice, painting, music, movement, where you give form to what's formless. It can be time in nature, where you're reminded that you're part of something infinitely larger and infinitely older than your personal drama. The key is consistency. Not perfection, not intensity, but returning again and again to the practice of meeting yourself honestly. Jung himself kept a red leather journal he called the Red Book, where he documented his own descent into the unconscious. He painted, he dialogued with inner figures, he allowed himself to be undone and reassembled. He didn't do this because he had it all figured out. He did it because he knew that without a practice of active engagement with the psyche, he would be swept away. And here's the paradox he lived, but rarely stated outright. Survival after awakening doesn't mean going back to the old fuel. It means consenting to the upgrade, with humility and with routines that keep you human. Think of it like breathing. Inhale the transcendent, exhale into the dishes, the emails, the difficult conversation you need to have without abandoning your center. You're not trying to escape the ordinary. You're trying to bring the sacred into it, to live from a place where there's no separation between spirit and matter, between the mystical and the mundane. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming special, but becoming whole, not transcending your humanity, but fully inhabiting it, not escaping the tension of opposites, but holding them both without collapsing into one side or the other. And that tension is where the real transformation happens. So if you're feeling directionless after waking up, if the old goals feel empty and the new ones haven't arrived yet, understand this: you're not lost. You're in the chrysalis, and the chrysalis isn't failure, it's process. The caterpillar doesn't know it's becoming a butterfly. It only knows that everything it was is dissolving, and the temptation to panic, to claw out of the cocoon, to declare the whole thing a mistake, is overwhelming. But if it stays, if it allows the dissolution without premature action, something new emerges, not by force, but by surrender. And that's your task now, not to figure it out. Not to force a new identity or a new mission, but to stay present to the dissolving, to trust that the psyche knows what it's doing even when the ego is terrified, to let the old maps burn without rushing to draw new ones. Because the directionlessness you're experiencing isn't the absence of direction. It's the clearing of false directions, the stripping away of paths that were never truly yours. And once that clearing is complete, once the noise dies down, you'll begin to hear something quieter, deeper, more true. Not a booming voice from the sky, but a subtle knowing that rises from within. Not a 10-step plan, but a next right step, and then another, and another. This is how individuation works. Not in leaps, but in increments. Not in certainty, but in trust. Not by grasping, but by allowing. And the allowing is the hardest part, because the ego wants control, wants to know, wants to secure itself against the terror of uncertainty. But the self doesn't move on the ego's timeline. It moves in spiral time, in mythic time, in the time of seasons and cycles. And your job isn't to rush it. Your job is to show up day after day and do the small things that keep you rooted. To honor the body, to speak the truth even when it's uncomfortable, to make space for grief and rage and joy without needing to perform any of them for an audience. To stop asking, "What's my purpose?" and start asking, "What wants to move through me today?" That shift in the question changes everything. Because purpose, in the ego's language, is something you find, something you achieve, something you can put on a business card. But in the language of the self, purpose is something you surrender to, something you become a vessel for, something that finds you when you stop chasing it. And the chosen ones, the people who feel this weight, this calling, this strange sense of destiny without a clear shape, aren't chosen because they're better. They're chosen because they said yes, often without knowing what they were agreeing to. They're chosen because somewhere deep in their psyche, there was a willingness to be undone, to be reshaped, to walk into the fire and trust they'd come out transformed rather than destroyed. But here's Jung's final warning. the one that should sober anyone who thinks awakening is a shortcut to bliss. If you don't take the path seriously, if you bypass the shadow, skip the grounding, avoid the container, and inflate yourself with spiritual superiority, the unconscious will come for you. Not as punishment, but as correction. You'll be humbled, and the humbling will be harsh. You'll lose what you thought made you special. You'll be stripped of the persona you built around being awake, and you'll be forced to confront the raw, unpolished humanness you tried to transcend. And that confrontation can save you if you let it. Because on the other side of the humbling is something real, not the performance of enlightenment, but the quiet, unglamorous work of being whole. Not the image of the chosen one, but the lived experience of someone who's integrated enough of their darkness and light to move through the world with integrity. Not the guru, but the gardener, someone who tends their inner landscape with patience, who knows that growth is slow, that weeds return, that the work is never finished. This is what it means to honor the calling without inflating around it. To recognize that, yes, something powerful is moving through you, and no, that doesn't make you special. It makes you responsible. Responsible to do the work, to stay grounded, to serve the process rather than your image of yourself. Responsible to build a life that can hold the energy without burning out or burning others. Responsible to remain humble, curious, and endlessly willing to be surprised by what you don't yet know about yourself. And if you can do that, if you can walk the tightrope between honoring the calling and staying human, between feeling chosen and remembering your dust, between accessing the transcendent and washing the dishes, then the directionlessness transforms. It stops being a problem and starts being a clearing, a space where the old no longer fits and the new hasn't yet solidified. A holy pause, a breath between identities. And in that pause, if you're still enough, patient enough, brave enough to do nothing, you'll start to sense it. The quiet knowing, the subtle pull, the invitation that doesn't shout. And you'll take a step, not because you're certain, but because something in you says yes. And that step taken in uncertainty, but rooted in trust, is worth more than 1,000 steps taken in fear. That's the path Jung walked. That's the path he's asking you to walk. Not away from your humanity, but deeper into it. Not above the mess, but through it. Not as the hero who saves the world, but as the person who does the difficult, unglamorous work of saving themselves, one honest choice at a time. And that's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. Because here's what happens next on this journey, and it's something Jung witnessed in his own patience but rarely spoke about in public terms. The moment you stop resisting the directionlessness, the moment you stop treating it like a problem to solve and start treating it like a teacher, the entire field shifts. The unconscious, which had been pushing material at you in waves, dreams that wake you at 3 in the morning, synchronicities that feel too precise to be coincidence, emotions that arrive uninvited and sit heavy in your chest, begins to reorganize. It's as if the psyche was testing you, asking, are you serious about this, or are you just another tourist in the land of awakening? And your willingness to stay, to not flee back into distraction or numb out with spiritual bypassing, sends a signal. The signal says, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm ready to be taught. And that's when the real education begins, not the kind you get from books or workshops, though those have their place, but the kind that comes from direct encounter with the archetypal realm, the place where myths aren't stories from the past, but living forces that shape your present. You might find yourself dreaming of a wise old man who speaks in riddles, or a fierce woman who hands you a sword, or a child who leads you to a door you've been avoiding. These aren't random images. They're emissaries from the self, and they're trying to communicate something your ego can't yet articulate. Jung would tell you to write them down, to paint them, to dialogue with them, as if they were real. Because in the psychic realm, they are real. They carry information, guidance, warnings. And they will keep returning in different forms until you acknowledge what they're pointing toward. But here's the part that makes this work so demanding. The guidance never comes in the form you want. You're hoping for clarity, a roadmap, a clear mission statement you can frame and put on the wall. What you get instead is a fragment, a feeling, a pull in a direction that makes no logical sense, an image that disturbs you. A person who appears in your life at exactly the right moment and says exactly what you needed to hear, even though they have no idea why they said it. This is how the self speaks, not in certainties, but in clues. And your task is to follow the thread without needing to see where it leads, to take the next step even when the path is dark, to trust the process even when the outcome is invisible. This is faith, but not the kind that religions typically preach. It's not faith in an external deity who will reward you for obedience. It's faith in the intelligence of your own psyche, in the organizing principle that's been guiding you since before you were born, that knows more about who you're becoming than your conscious mind ever could. And that faith isn't blind, it's built slowly through evidence, through the 100 small moments when you listen to the quiet knowing and it turned out to be right. Through the times you ignored it and paid the price. Through the pattern, you start to recognize that when you move from the center, from the place of integration rather than inflation or collapse, things align. Not always in the way you expected, but in the way that serves your becoming. And this is where the loneliness becomes acute. Because the people around you, the ones still operating from the old fuel, status, accumulation, performance, the need to be seen, can't understand what you're doing. They see you turning down opportunities that look good on paper. They see you withdrawing from social circles that once defined you. They see you prioritizing time alone, time in stillness, time that looks from the outside like you're doing nothing. And they worry, or they judge, or they try to pull you back, convinced you're depressed, lost, wasting your potential. And maybe you are depressed, in the clinical sense. Because individuation and depression can look identical from the outside. Both involve withdrawal. Both involve a loss of interest in things that used to matter. Both involve long stretches of not knowing. The difference is in the directionality. Depression collapses inward and stays there, circling the same thoughts, the same pain, with no movement. Individuation spirals inward and then expands outward again, changed. It's a death and a rebirth, not just a death. But you can't explain that to someone who hasn't been through it. You can't make them understand that you're not running away from life. You're running toward a life that's actually yours. And so you learn to be alone in a new way. Not lonely, though there are moments of loneliness, but alone in the sense of all one. Integrated, self-referencing, no longer dependent on external validation to know you're on the right path. This is sovereignty, and it's not cold or distant. It's warm, grounded, deeply connected. But the connection comes from the inside out, not the outside in. You stop needing people to understand you. You stop needing to explain yourself. You show up as you are, and if that resonates, beautiful. If it doesn't, also beautiful, because your worth is no longer negotiable. It's not based on how well you perform the role others expect. It's based on your commitment to the truth of your own becoming. And that's a truth no one can take from you. Now let's talk about what happens when the new direction finally begins to emerge, because it will. Not with fanfare, not with certainty, but with quiet insistence. You'll notice yourself drawn to things you didn't used to care about. A book that keeps appearing in your periphery. A skill you suddenly want to learn for no practical reason. A place that calls to you. A project that feels important even though you can't explain why. And the ego will resist. Because the ego wants guarantees. It wants to know that this new direction will pay off, that it's safe, that it makes sense. But the self doesn't offer guarantees, it offers invitations. And the invitation is always the same. Trust me. Follow this thread. See where it leads. And if you follow it, even tentatively, even with doubt, you'll start to notice something shifting. The energy that was stuck, the heaviness that made everything feel like pushing a boulder uphill, begins to move. Not because the external circumstances changed, but because you're finally aligned with your own psyche. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer trying to force a path that was never yours. You're surrendering to the path that is yours, and the relief is palpable. This doesn't mean it gets easy. It means it gets real. The obstacles are still there, but now you have the energy to meet them. The doubts are still there, but now you have the capacity to hold them without being consumed. The loneliness is still there, but now it's a companionship with yourself that feels sacred rather than isolating. And the directionlessness, the thing that terrified you, the thing that made you wonder if you'd made a terrible mistake by waking up, transforms into spaciousness, into possibility, into the understanding that not knowing is not the same as being lost. It's the fertile void where everything new is born. Jung called this the temenos, the sacred space, the container where transformation happens. And you've been building it this whole time, whether you realized it or not. Every moment you chose to stay present instead of numbing out. Every time you faced the shadow instead of projecting it. Every small act of grounding, of honoring the body, of showing up to your life. You were building the vessel strong enough to hold what's coming, and what's coming is you. Not the you that you thought you were supposed to be, not the you that your family, your culture, your conditioning tried to shape, but the you that was always there, underneath all the layers, waiting for permission to emerge. The you that is strange and singular and doesn't fit neatly into categories. The you that carries gifts the world doesn't yet know it needs. The you that is here not to perform greatness, but to embody wholeness, and that embodiment is the real work. It's not about what you do, it's about who you become, and who you become changes everything you touch, not through force, but through presence. People feel it when they're near you. They can't name it, but something in them relaxes, opens, remembers that they too are allowed to be whole. This is the legacy of individuation. Not a legacy you plan or control, but one that ripples out naturally when you stop pretending and start living from the center. And the world needs that now more than ever. Not more people performing enlightenment, not more gurus selling certainty, but more people willing to walk into the unknown, to be undone, to come back humbler and more human, and to live from that place without apology. That's what Jung was asking of the chosen. Not to save the world, but to do the work of becoming whole, so that the world has more examples of what that looks like. So that the people who are waking up behind you can see that it's possible to survive the directionlessness, to integrate the shadow, to hold the tension of opposites, and to emerge not broken, but beautiful in your brokenness, not perfect, but real in your imperfection. So if you're standing in this threshold right now, if you've been feeling chosen but directionless, if the old life no longer fits, but the new one hasn't taken shape, know this: you're exactly where you need to be. The discomfort isn't evidence of failure, it's evidence of growth. The confusion isn't proof you're broken, it's proof you're breaking open. And the emptiness you feel where purpose used to live isn't a void to be feared, it's a womb. Something is gestating in that darkness, and your only job is to protect the process, to not abort it prematurely by rushing back into old patterns or grasping at false certainties. To sit with the not knowing, the not doing, the not becoming anything other than present, because presence is the doorway. Presence is where the self meets the ego and says, I've been waiting for you to stop running. I've been here all along, beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the fear. And now that you're finally still enough to hear me, we can begin the real work. The work of integrating what was split. The work of loving what was rejected. The work of becoming undivided. And that work doesn't happen in a blaze of glory. It happens in 1,000 small moments of choosing truth over comfort, depth over distraction, integrity over image. It happens when you tell the truth, even though your voice shakes. When you set a boundary, even though it disappoints someone. When you honor your own rhythm, even though the world demands speed. When you stop apologizing for taking up space, for needing time, for being complex and contradictory and human. This is the path Jung walked. This is the path he's inviting you to walk. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours. Not because it guarantees success, but because it guarantees authenticity. Not because it will make you special, but because it will make you whole. And wholeness, not perfection, is the goal. Wholeness is what the world is starving for. Not more people pretending they have it all figured out, but more people brave enough to admit they don't, and humble enough to keep showing up anyway. So take the next step, whatever that is for you today. Maybe it's reaching out for support. Maybe it's sitting in stillness and listening. Maybe it's creating something with your hands. Maybe it's simply breathing and trusting that the path will reveal itself one footfall at a time. You don't need to have it all mapped out. You just need to say yes to what's here, to what's true, to what's calling you forward even if you can't see where it leads. And if you do that, if you keep doing that, one honest choice at a time, you will look back one day and realize you weren't lost at all. You were finding yourself, and that finding, that becoming, that returning to who you always were beneath the roles and the expectations and the fear, that's the whole point. That's the journey. That's what it means to be chosen. Not for glory, but for truth. Not for certainty, but for courage. Not to transcend your humanity, but to fully, finally, beautifully inhabit it.